Thank all of you for being here. I want to begin with a little bit of, not related to husbands, but relating generally to homes and that sort of thing. But I want to ask a question to begin with. Who are some, and the women can answer this also. I really want to see what the men would say, but the women can all answer this also. Any men in the Bible that you find particularly helpful in your role as a man? You know any men in the Bible? You women know any men in the Bible the men should be patterning their lives after?
Boaz would be one I would think.
Boaz, okay. What did he do? Why?
Boaz was taking care of and did everything to take care of his future wife even before they were.
Okay, all right.
He showed affection for her.
Very good. Good.
I think of Daniel, who stood up for what he believed in the face of opposition.
Very good. I thought Daniel might be the first one mentioned.
Abraham.
What about Abraham? Strikes your fancy.
Willing to take Isaac to the altar.
Yeah.
Obey God. I mean, that's hard to even fathom.
Yeah. John?
I think about Joseph, because here he was betrothed to a woman who is now pregnant. He knows the child is not his, but he is of such character that when he's instructed, the Lord says this is okay, when you worry about it, he just follows.
And he accepts that. Yeah. Good. Anybody else?
David.
What about David?
He's kind of basically a man's man. He's a mighty warrior, but he also has a sensitive side to him.
Yeah.
And he's not afraid to show emotion as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And, I guess the most redeeming thing I think about David is the scripture says, how does the scripture describe him? The man after what? God's own heart. Pretty high standard. Anybody else? Anything from Sunday, you all, any comment or question, anything from Sunday? Well, then let's talk about Wednesday. Again, I'm not ready to get to husbands just yet. Let's talk a little bit about, and I wanted us to sing this song tonight, think a little bit about homes. Homes are really the building block of society. Just think a little bit about the scriptures. In Genesis chapter 2, marriage was instituted. In Genesis chapter 4, unions became families. In 5 and 6, Genesis 5 and 6, families proliferated. Then the flood came. And then after the flood, we see more and more families, beginning in Genesis 11, we see more and more families beginning to have a common purpose. And what the sociologists would say that, you begin to see society taking place. So the point I want to make about this is two standpoints. Number one is from the world standpoint, and then particularly from the country in which most of us live, is societies were our society was very impacted by families. Now, by the same token, families are impacted by society. But we need to think about how fundamental and how basic families are to the structure where we live, and I would say in this country. It's true in other countries as well, but particularly here. And as a result, some of you may have seen the expression that's used, that as the families go, so goes the country. That, I think, is a fairly significant statement, and one that relates to what we're doing in this trimester, in that if families are going to pot, and I didn't mean, I shouldn't use that word, should I? But they are going to pot. Right? I really didn't mean that from that standpoint. If families are deteriorating, how's that? Chances are society is going to be deteriorating. And it seems to me that in the homes of Christians, for the most part, we see not deterioration, but we see wives and husbands and parents being what they need to be and raising children the way they should. Now, obviously, that's not totally true, but I don't know how many we have tonight, 65 or 70. So just think, around our country, wonder how many towns in our country would have this many people assembled tonight on Bible class. And I hate to say it, I don't think too many. Now, the other thing I want to say in general, and Scott and Randy may disagree, but they'll have their hour so they can. That's a good thing about having different teachers. You know, you can say what you want to, and then the others can straighten it out later. And that is, that as I look around this class, what we're doing in this class, we're not teaching as much information. Because most of you know about Ephesians chapter 5, right? Ephesians chapter 5 deals with what? Maybe you don't know it. But Ephesians chapter 5, you know, this is a reluctant group. I know part of it's because of the size. And, you know, I'm strange and all that, but you all could limber up a little bit. Ephesians chapter 5 deals with what? Husbands and wives. And Christ and the church. So, I guess the premise of what I was going to say is wrong. What I was going to say is, I don't think we're going to be in this class generally dispensing as much information as we are trying to motivate us. Because most of us in this class know how we should carry out our roles individually, and if we're in a marriage, or if you hope to be in a marriage sometime in a marriage. And I know there's some people in here who aspire to be in a marriage sometime, right, Sarah? But anyway, oh, excuse me. So, Sarah's one of my favorite people to pick on, so you know I thought I ought to get this in early. So anyway, what we're trying to do, I think, is to remind us of what the scriptures have to say about what we're supposed to do. Again, we know that, but the question is sometimes, why don't we do it? And that's what we'll be talking about some as far as the role of husbands. We're going to finally get to husbands tonight. Again, think about what kind of an opportunity you have to impact, you know, not this nation probably, maybe some of you will be at that level, but certainly in a given community where you live now or where you will live, you have an opportunity to impact that community by setting a good example as a husband or a father or a mother or whatever role you're in. And the scriptures, I think, are pretty clear about that. As we think about the role of a husband, we talked about the role of wives on Sundays. We think about the role of husbands. When the role of one mate changes, obviously that's going to cause the role of the other mate to change. And as I said on Sunday, in our culture, we have had a lot of changes as far as the role of husbands and wives are concerned. Much of it, I think, goes back to shortly after World War II. It's sort of the root of it, but it's gotten more escalated in recent years, and I'm not going to get off on that much. But wives are much more outside the home rather than inside the home for the major part of their time, and that affects then who makes decisions and who makes decisions in the home. And we're going to have some classes later on about that. Who makes these decisions? Who decides who's going to pay the bill? Sometimes, and I think I've done this to Lauren and Ryan, when you get married, I said, well, who's going to set the thermostat? And you know, that's, for those of you who are not married, that sometimes is an issue in the family, because one has a high tolerance for cold and one for hot and all of that. And that's sort of a simple thing to do, but I usually ask that to get them to think about it. But who's going to make all these decisions? Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to decide if you've got 4 kids, who's going to decide if one plays one sport when they're little and the rest of them I know one family, they're not in here, so there's not anybody who's here. I'm not gonna pick anybody out this time. They've got 4 kids, and the father said, we'll have 1 kid a year playing a sport. Now that makes 3 unhappy, probably makes the mother unhappy because she wants to get them out of the house. But these are all little kids. So who makes those decisions? Well, if you go back 50 years or 60 years or so, that decision was made more with one of the mates than the other. And that then brings me to the topic, which is the first one on the sheet, if you have today's sheet, and that is leadership. Who provides the leadership? It's the husband's place, I think, in many of these things, for the with the wife following up. Now, I would tell you, and Scott's going to do submission, so I'm not going to say much about this sometime, whenever that is. I think a person who is a husband and has very many smarts, the husband is going to use the ability of his wife with regard to a lot of these things. And as I said the other day, and I'll continue to say this, most of you women are smarter than men anyway. But the thing about submission and about leadership is not who is smartest. Smartest is never mentioned in anywhere. So we think about the husband. We're going to read these passages that you've read before. Turn to Ephesians chapter 5, if you will. Ephesians chapter 5. And I'll refer to them some, but not.
The word of the Lord that came to Zephaniah, the son of Cushai, son of
Yeah,
Galilee, son of Amos.
I've been listening to Zephaniah lately.
Don't get me off the subject here. Ephesians chapter 5. As I said last time, we usually begin that with 22, but let me just remind you in verse 21 of 5, submitting, well, it really goes back way beyond that. It really goes back to verse 15. But 21 says, submitting to one another in the fear of God, and that's all people. Then 22, wives, submit to your own husband as to the Lord, for the husband and his wife is also Christ as head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. And I'm coming back to that later. That he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So, 28, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are the members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason, what reason? For this reason, what just preceded. A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church, which really says that what this is about, the main focus of this passage is Christ and the church. Now, it just so happens that it fits so well with classes like this that that's where it gets mentioned a lot. And then verse 33 says, nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And then, if you would, turn over to 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Ladies, you've heard this already twice or a time more. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. I told you all Wednesday or Sunday, you women have a great impact on your husbands. And I think that's the point here. Verse 2, because when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging of the hair, wearing of gold, putting on a fine apparel. And that's an interesting passage in light of where we live in this day and age. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of the Lord. For in this matter, in olden times, the holy men who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughter you are, if you're good and not afraid with terror. And then in verse 7, husbands, likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. And that last clause, the last phrase in that your prayers not be hindered, is one that I have been a little bit nervous about on occasions. So I think that's worth emphasizing a little bit. So let's talk about leadership as far as husbands are concerned. I want to paraphrase something that came from a person called Fred Renich, R-E-N-I-C-H, and some of this is mine and some of this is his. And I'll read the statement. Leadership is committed to promoting the best interests of those who are led. There is no room for selfishness in true leadership. A leader is not a dictator. Dictators are interested in the goals that the dictator might have, and they're centered around the dictator. Now, let me say as an aside on that, I've always thought if you could have a benevolent dictator, which was a term that was used centuries ago, if you could have a benevolent dictator, that would be the best kind of arrangement. And I'm convinced in our family I could have done that, but I didn't get the chance. But anyway, true leadership cannot be separated from true love. True leadership cannot be separated from true love. A leader in this sense is prepared to sacrifice self for the sake of those that the leader leads. So that's a statement that I've really liked. It I think says a lot about leadership. Husbands who are Christians need to understand this concept of leadership. And that is, if you love somebody, then you're going to care for them in a particular way. Now, let me say quickly, and without being in too much trouble, maybe some women do not want to be led. But a man who loves his wife will try to understand her and honor her. Decisions should always be intended for the best interest of a husband's wife and the family. Now, think for a minute, men and women. Why would, in our day and age, why would a husband abdicate the leadership role? What do you think?
To keep peace.
I'm sorry?
To keep peace.
To keep peace, okay. Okay. What else?
He doesn't want the responsibility.
I'm sorry?
He does not want the responsibility.
Oh, it doesn't want the responsibility, yeah. What else?
I think
Come on, guys.
our culture diminishes men as
Okay.
leaders. And so if
Thank
you've
you.
grown up in this culture, then you're like, well, I'm not better, so I can't be the leader, you know.
Yeah, very good. Let me ask the ladies, and I may be wrong about what I believe about this. It seems to me, in the day and age which we find ourselves in this country, that it's more difficult than it's ever been for a woman to be a wife as described. You all have any reaction to that? Nobody wants to comment?
You're seen as weak.
Huh?
I mean, you're seen as weak. You're not seen
Yeah.
as the strong woman
By
that
others
society
in
standards.
society, yeah.
Right.
Somebody started to say something. John, was that you? Okay. Well,
I ain't a lady.
that's obvious. Yeah, but you can speak anyway. And I don't know the answer to this. I've been thinking about this for a long, long time. We send our daughters to college, and I'm not opposed to that, so I want this to get out. You know the old expression about keep them barefoot and pregnant. That's not the where I'm going with this at all. But and again, since many of you women are at least equal, if not more capable than many of us men, you know, you go to college. Look at the honor graduates. Look at the gender breakdown sometime of honor graduates. It's not encouraging, guys. But anyway, so you get a degree, and some people, some women are looking for a husband so they can go home and use that degree to homeschool or to raise children or whatever, and they're satisfied with that. But many are not. And it is a dilemma, I think, that we're dealing with at this point in our culture. And again, since women are very capable, but leadership in the home is not about who is the most capable. Scott?
Kind of 2 points. One, I mean, I can't speak to when you were starting your family, but
Yeah.
it seems like more and more there is a void of male leadership in the home, is what we've been talking about. So when there is that void, often, you know, it is something fills the void.
Right.
So that makes it, you know, from a wife's standpoint, well, if he's not going to lead, somebody's got to. So part of the problem is men not stepping up and leading. And the second part of that is, you know, what does it mean to lead?
Yeah.
It does not mean wake up in the morning and say, okay, let me think, stick my finger in the wind and, you know, see what direction we're going today.
Yeah.
A true leader plans out in advance and sets priorities, sets objectives, and decides what is important, not, okay, this popped up, let me decide what to do now. That's not
Yeah.
leading a family.
Very good. Question was, you know, why does some men not take the leadership? As has been said over here, I don't know how it was said, but you know, they're too busy, work at home, or work all day, come home and think, "Phew, all I want to do is get in a recliner and do whatever." Wait a second. And then as Scott has said, you know, it's just how we see our roles and how we plan for those and how we do that. Richard?
Well, one thing I think that's interesting that I've seen in my parents' whole situation and other people that I've whether counsel financially or whatever, is how many, and I'm not trying to, you know, push for women to work from the home, whether it's, or work in places where they don't have to work, where they aren't required. Well, here's what I said. My mother wanted to stay at home, but my father was not a leader from a financial standpoint and ran the financials terribly. And I remember my mom talking about she had to go get a job because he couldn't pay the bills and he wasn't managing the finances very well. And over the people that I've consulted over the years, there's multiple times where women don't see the leadership from their husbands from a financial, either from whether they're earning enough or whether they're not managing the resources that they do get. And so they, needing that financial security, said, I'm going to go, you know, get a part-time job, whatever the case is. So I think that's an area that there are plenty of women that want to work and want to have that career, but I think there's a lot that feel the need to because of the lack of male leadership, whether it's managing the finances or things like that.
So how do we balance this? Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize, first and foremost, husbands need to provide the leadership in a family, in a home, as the Bible outlines it. Secondly, need to be understanding about whatever the circumstances are involved, like Richard, like the ones you're talking about, like Scott's talking about. But we need to remember, and I'm looking at the clock, so I'm going to leave this shortly unless we want to say some more. We need to remember that as men, we have a God-designated role of being a leader in the family. And leadership is not some kind of a movie kind of thing, but it is providing direction, it's providing love. And it says that a man is supposed to love and honor his wife. And you think about that when you're thinking about providing leadership. Yes, Terry?
A good leader also will recognize the God-designed helpmeet and her individual strengths to contribute.
Yes, and as I said earlier, you know, between a husband and wife, they're not always the same kind of skills, so they're different skills. The husband can still be the leader by how he utilizes the skills that his wife has. And I don't think that abdicates the role as a leader. What else on that? Anything? I'm sorry?
We've got to get away from where we're letting society set our standards and let God be the one that sets our standards.
And that is more and more difficult when you see that if you have kids that are in school and how other parents react and that sort of thing. So it is a difficult kind of thing.
I also think the role of women too is really important in the leadership, because we as wives have to be that help meet, and we have to be encouraging to them rather than just taking it over and taking control. We have to encourage them and be the person they want to lead. So I think it falls on both.
And a wife can encourage her husband to take a more active hand in that. Anything else?
Well, I just think, in my particular case, I didn't have male role models to look at. And so I'm, in a lot of ways, at the beginning of my marriage, starting from scratch, learning how to be a leader, because I never had a role model. So I'm trying to model that for my own children and my own son.
Yeah.
And I think, that's another reason.
That's very good. Thank you. Anything else? Well, the second thing on that list I'm going to deal with, and that is providing for the needs of wives. And the reason I'm going to do that is Randy's going to teach about needs, and we have some overlapping things, so I'm not going to do that. Then let's talk about loving and honoring your wife, as we read about in Ephesians chapter 5. That's particularly verse 25. A husband is to love his wife as what? As Christ loved the church. Men, does that set the bar too high for us?
Apparently sets the bar where God wanted it.
Okay. Pretty good answer. Is that, I'm not going to ask for testimonials. I'm not going to let the wives answer how you've done on this, but that's a pretty high bar, right? Christ gave his life for the church. Would you give your life for your wife? You don't have to answer. Ava.
Most all would, but they won't get in on where they want to be.
That's the thing I was thinking, the idea of giving yourself to your wife in a, sacrificing your life physically for it is likely a lot easier than day in and day out sacrificing your selfishness.
Would you live for your wife? You've died for her. You've done it once. You live every day.
Okay, man, here's a test. This is a test I found in somebody's writing. Man's spiritual, specific his ability to lead his wife. Are you willing to step into the role of loving leader and be the head of the household? You don't have to answer. As head of the house, do you promise to avoid dictatorial practices? And I'm sure nobody in here would say, well, I'm certainly not dictatorial, right? Right. Will you work at including her thinking in all your family decisions? And I think that's a really important comment. I think when we think about subjection and submission, and again, I'm not getting too much into yours, when you think about that, a wise husband, I think is going to have a discussion with his mate about how you deal with all these things that come along in a family. And that does not give up any of the leadership role. In fact, that is a leadership quality, I believe. Will you be committed to understanding her needs and giving her honor? Those are two different things, understanding a need and giving her honor. If I have time, I want to come back to about that. Will you do your best to provide for your family's financial needs and prepare for their security in the event of your death or injury, early death or injury? You like that one, Richard. Will you willingly take the lead in providing for your family's spiritual well-being? A really important one. Will you willingly take the lead? That doesn't say take the lead, but willingly take the lead in providing for your family's spiritual well-being. If there are children, will you take the lead in teaching them how to apply Bible principles to themselves? Will you lead your wife in setting goals to guide the spiritual development of each family member? So just for its worth, you can think about those. So us men need to love and honor our wives. The love required by God is not just an emotional feeling. Now, let me quickly add, and on June 12th, I'm going to do a class on love, so I'll talk some more about love. I'm not saying that emotion is left out of love, but emotion, as God's thinking about it here, I think is the way you think, the way you act, all this is an important part of the picture. Husbands need to try to grow the emotional side of love so it flourishes and does not wither. In 1 John 3:18, regarding everybody else, not just husbands and wives, that we are to love in deed and in truth. It's a very genuine, sincere thing. As I had on that handout, men are to love their wives sacrificially. Men are to love with purpose and realistically. In Proverbs 31:29, the worthy woman passage, near the end of that, in verse 29 of 31, it says that her husband gave her the praise due her. So it's an important kind of thing. Now we are on that sheet to live with our wives according to knowledge, and that's taken from 1 Peter 3 and verse 7. And what I'm about to say, you've taken the wrong way, but I'm going to say it anyway. Men and women are very different. You know that physically, but they're very different in other ways. In fact, Brother Long knows this. Women have bigger kidneys or bigger some internal organ than men have. So there are a lot of differences with regard to men and women. The person's not in here. I wish he were. I'd tell this. Sometime last 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 or 6 months, I'm not sure when. One of our young men who's about Richard's age came in one Wednesday night. We were over on the far side of the building before services started. And he said, just one time, I would like to have hormones. And so I have no idea what had gone on that day. And I said, well, from what little I know about that, you probably don't. In thinking about men and women being different, you ladies do have some things like that. Now, on the other side of that, I read where somebody said the other day that testosterone defies all logic. So, that's the other side of that with regard to the makeup of the bodies and that sort of thing. So anyway, the point about all this is that we are to love our wives according to knowledge and live with them according to knowledge. And I want to give you some, you may not want these men, I want to give you some suggestions for trying to understand your wife, or if you ever have one, trying to. Now, don't ask Rose if I do these. This is out of the book. No, I'm serious. Rose wanted to come to this class. I told somebody this the other day, but she was afraid I would embarrass her. And I said, well, you can come as a fact checker. But she decided not to come. Think about this in trying to understand your wife. This is about appreciating wives. Listen to your wife. And you say, oh yeah, I do that. I'm talking about really listening to your wife. Not with your mind somewhere else. And be curious about it, and be kind about it. Think about, and some of you have been married so long, maybe you can't think about this. Think about how attentive you were to your wife before you got married. And then you live together for a while and you think, well, I know what she's thinking about. Now, you women are worse about that, I think, than men, and saying, well, I know what you're thinking about. Be courteous about that. Be sensitive to what the wife says, if she's hurting, if she has a need. Now, let me say, men, and you all know this if you've been around women very long, sometimes when women have an issue and they want to talk about it, a man has one view about that, what you need to do, and a woman has another. If she's got a problem, what do us men want to do? We want to fix it. A lot of times the women don't want it fixed. They just want to talk about it. Now, women, sometimes for us men, it's not easy to know whether you really want it fixed or whether you really want to talk about it. And I'm not being facetious about that. That's kind of how it is. Another one is how we should deal with our wives. Wives should be able to trust the husband this is a really significant one. Women should be able to trust their husbands. I don't know about you all. I enjoy sometimes reading the love write-in columns. You know, they'll write and say, you know, my husband and I have been married 31 years and he hasn't been nice a day in our marriage and all this, and then they react to them. But I like to read those sometimes, and you see just how dumb people can be about these things. But let me tell you, husbands, if you ever break the trust of your wife, that does not get repaired quickly. In fact, if it's a serious break, and particularly if it's covered in 1 Corinthians 7 verses 2 through 5, if it's a sexual matter, you're going to pay for that for a long, long time. So men, be careful about that. Sort of related to that, wives need romance in their lives. Some husbands are better than that at others. We need to be creative. We need to surprise them sometimes. You know, particularly if you have children, it would really be good to take a date sometimes. Rose and I haven't had a date in a long time, but we haven't had children in a long time. Another one, and this one I really want to emphasize. Appreciate that God used a different design in creating a woman. Appreciate that God used a different design in creating a woman, not just sexually. A wife is a complement to a husband and was created to think, to feel, and perceive, and act differently. Talked about that earlier. Discovering the woman you marry can be an exciting journey, albeit a challenge at times. But you know, mystery, the mystique of things sometimes is really helpful. There are a lot of other things to include in this. You all have any comments or questions about any of this? Before Randy talks, Scott, are you going to say something?
Yeah, you said listen to your wives. I'm taking it a step further.
Okay.
And I say this because this is what I need to do more of. It is make the opportunity available for you and your wife to sit down and have a conversation. If you don't know what's going on in her mind, where she's at, what she needs of you, then that's on you, and you're failing in your responsibility of a husband. You have to make that available.
You'll hear that over here. Don't just guess, make opportunities for that. And that's particularly true for those who have small children, because there's a lot that goes on in the household with small children. I think that was the case. Anybody else comment? Okay. 2 minutes. Randy, you got it.
So I've got some homework for you all. It's not too bad. And who in here knows, thank you. Who in here knows their love language? I know Richard does. Okay, so if you've been in the Growing Kids God's Way class, you've probably done this exercise, but I ask that you do it again. And if you haven't done it in a while, things might have changed, maybe not, but it does reveal, I think it's a good quiz test. It takes about 15 minutes, and on here it says for couples. I know we've got a lot of singles in here, but please still take it because it's relevant for anybody. And it's going to help lead our discussion the next couple of class periods because we're going to be talking about the needs of wives, the needs of husbands in the next couple of classes. So it's pretty straightforward. Again, it takes about 15 minutes. Just follow the simple instructions. And it says to take it when you're relaxed, all right? Don't take it if you've been in a little spat, you know, with your significant other. Don't take it. So find a good time to take it. And please bring it Sunday. We'll talk about it on Sunday morning and Wednesday. Thank you.